Everyone. My name is Sidonie Bellot and I am a researcher at the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew in the UK. Please memorize my face now if you want to because I will now make place for the slides only. So today I will talk about a little study that we conducted at Kew on the origins of the fascinating double coconut. In case you wonder what I'm talking about, let me introduce you to the double coconut, aka coco de mer, aka coco fess, which is the largest seed in the world, bigger than a human's head and weighing up to 18 kilograms. In this painting by Marianne North, you can see how the seed, with its hard seed coat that we call the pyrene in brown here, so how the seed is enclosed in the fruit. And you can also see the white endosperm, which is comparable to coconut flesh in texture. And this is the endosperm, is what feeds the seed when it germinates. The huge fruits that contain the double coconuts are produced by a palm with fan-shaped leaves, whose scientific name is Lodoicea maldivica. Here is how its home looks like in the Vallée de Mai on the Seychelles island of Praslin. There grow the remnants of a forest dominated by these palms that once covered the whole island, but that was of course before humans settled there. On the soil of this forest, the double coconuts germinate sometimes months after the fruit has fallen off the mother tree. Big as they are, the seeds are not carried by animals, but the fruits can sometimes roll downhill. In addition, the seeds evolved an interesting organ, indicated with the orange arrow here. This organ, which is called an extended cotyledonary axis, or more commonly the rope in the case of Lodoicea, can extend up to 10 meters long before making roots and shoots that will take more than 20 years to develop into a fertile double coconut palm. This rope, as well as rolling down hills, allow the seedlings to establish few meters away from the mother tree and from other seedlings. This might help to limit competition for resources among the palms. Also, not all fruits roll downhill, and not all ropes extend as far as 10 meters. You see here that this seedling, the seed germinates and settles just close to the seed. Importantly, and contrary to what you may think, Lodoicea cannot expand its distribution range by dispersing double coconuts through floating on rivers or the ocean. The only double coconuts that float are those that have decayed inside because they already germinated or because of pests. Only then they become light enough to float, but then, of course, they are not able to germinate anymore. Such light, empty double coconuts have been found on the shores of the Maldives, India, and West Indonesia for centuries, but their origin remained unknown until the 18th century when people found Lodoicea palms in the Seychelles. So until then, the origin of the stranded double coconuts was explained by epic legends, and these legends, together with the extraordinary shape and size of these seeds, inspired numerous artists and stimulated the avidity of many people. It's even said that in the Maldives, sovereigns would punish by death anyone who would possess a double coconut, as all the double coconuts that were found had to be considered the king's immediate property. Even today, double coconut palms remain an object of amusement and awe, notably due to the suggestive shape of the seed, but also to that of its male inflorescence, which you can see here on the right, where the yellow dots are the male flowers. As a result, double coconuts continue to be sought for, either as a curiosity to display or as a traditional medicine. and notably an aphrodisiac, obviously. Unfortunately, if this enthusiasm is not contained, we will lose the double coconuts. Today there are only 3 populations of Lodoicea palms on 2 small islands of the Seychelles. Even so these populations are carefully managed, poaching still happens, and despite precautions taken, each population could be quickly wiped out by a natural disaster such as a fire or a disease. But how did the double coconut ended in such a precarious position? When did Lodoicea establish in the Seychelles? Where did it come from and how? When did the ancestors of Lodoicea evolve large seeds? And why? So in our study, we tried to bring some answers to these questions, and I will now take you through what we found. I will barely mention the methods we used. You can check them in our paper, which is freely available online at this link. To understand where the coconut comes from, we have to consider its evolutionary history and its family tree. So as I said, Lodoicea is a palm and it belongs to the palm subfamily Coryphoideae. Its closest relatives are the other members of the tribe called Boraceae. Some of them are famous, for instance the Palmyra palm or the Doom palm, which are both used in many ways by people throughout Africa. Together with 3 other tribes, the Chuniopheniceae, Caryotae, and Coryphae, the Boraceae form what we call the syncarpous clade. Our study encompasses this larger group, but today I will focus mainly on Lodoicea and its closest relatives from tribe Boraceae. So tribe Boraceae counts 22 species distributed from West Africa to New Guinea and all around the Indian Ocean. The 3 other tribes of the syncarpous clade are mainly located in Southeast Asia, but with few species in India, Sri Lanka, the Arabian Peninsula, and Madagascar. Lodoicea is the only one in the Seychelles, but some Boraceae occur not too far in Madagascar and the Mascarene Islands. Before this study, the phylogenetic relationships between Lodoicea and its closest relatives were unclear. This was problematic because without a clear idea of the phylogeny, it was impossible to infer the distribution or the seed size of the ancestors of Lodoicea. And therefore, it was impossible to answer our questions about the origins of the double coconut. In addition, it was already obvious that the seeds of Lodoicea's relatives varied a lot in size, as you can see on this slide, where I represented seeds from the different genera at the same scale. But seed sizes of the different species had never been measured in detail, preventing rigorous studies. So our first task was to gather plant material from which we could extract DNA to infer the phylogeny of Boraceae, and from which we could measure seeds more rigorously. Collecting this material was done more than 10 years ago in the context of another study, the revision of Borassus, that was performed by one of our co-authors, Ross Bayton, who is pictured here. Ross collected a lot of material in Kenya, Madagascar, and Burkina Faso, and was sent material from other places. None of what I will talk to you about now could have happened without him, nor without the many local researchers and field guides who helped him and who are listed here. The material collected enabled Ross to sequence 7 genes of Lodoicea and its relatives. We were also able to measure the seeds of multiple individuals for each species, and finally we also compiled data from the literature, such as the maximal reported size of the palms and if they lived in a shady or an open habitat. The first thing we did was to infer the phylogenetic relationships of Lodoicea and its relatives. And to date, when the different lineages diverged from each other. Here you see the resulting tree. It shows that Lodoicea, here, is most closely related to the genera Borassus and Borasodendron than to the other Boraceae. And even so, these genera currently have species in East Asia, Africa, and even India. Our analysis suggests that the common ancestors of Lodoicea and these genera were distributed in East Asia, but not in India or in the Seychelles. In addition, our dating analysis suggests that Lodoicea's lineage diverged here from other Boraceae around 60 million years ago. Of course, there is some uncertainty with our results. For instance, our analyses say that the divergence between Lodoicea and other Boraceae could be as old as 74 million years old or as young as 43 million years old. But these results that I'm showing you here are the most plausible based on the data we have. You can read about alternative results in our article. So taken together, it means that Lodoicea, or an ancestral form of it, arrived in the Seychelles from East Asia at the earliest around 60 million years ago, but possibly any time between then and now. So 60 million years ago, the Seychelles were already separated or in the process of separating from India, and they were separated by an ancient ocean from what is today East Asia. This suggests that the ancestor of Lodoicea must have arrived to the Seychelles by crossing the sea. In fact, our analysis suggests that at least 10 oceanic dispersal happened in Boraceae in the last 60 to 80 million years. You can see them here displayed as thicker branches. To know if these oceanic dispersals, now here represented by black dots, so to know if these dispersals involve small or large seeds, we inferred the size of the seeds of the ancestors of Boraceae. You can see the seed size plotted here for each ancestor, so at each node of the tree. Don't pay attention to the branch colors. They are not relevant for this presentation. According to our analysis, ancestral seeds size were smaller than the current seed sizes, but many were already many seeds were already more than 5 centimeters long when they dispersed across oceans. You can see here, 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 or here. So this suggests that the seeds were too big to be transported by birds or winds across the ocean. It's a recurrent finding of biogeographic studies that big seeds or even animals, such as lizards or monkeys, cross oceans, even so they do not float or cannot survive in seawater. The most likely explanation for this is that they are transported on vegetation mats, also called floating islands. If you need to convince yourself that floating islands are a thing, please check this paper and this video. And also remember that before humans colonized the planet, littorals and rivers were wilder and may have been easily prone to lose or carry large vegetation fragments, for instance after storms. So we now have some answers to our three first questions. Lodoicea's ancestors established in the Seychelles at the earliest around 60 million years ago, possibly much more recently, and they probably arrived transported on a floating vegetation mat. These results contradict the intuition that the divergence between Lodoicea and other Boraceae happened by vicariance when the Seychelles separated from India. It's possible that more evidence from the fossil record will contradict our results, but For the moment, that's what the available data suggest. We also show that the ancestors of Lodoicea had already relatively large seeds, but that they probably evolved into giant coconuts only after they arrived to the Seychelles, or at least only after they diverged from other boraceae 60 million years ago. Now our last question remains: why did Lodoicea evolve giant seeds? There are many reasons for plants to vary in seed size, and angiosperms do vary in seed size by many orders of magnitude. Even so, none produce as big seeds as those of Lodoicea. For our study, we focused on 6 mechanisms of seed size variation that are particularly relevant for palms. Sorry, I will describe them in simple terms, but you can refer to our paper for more details. The allometry hypothesis stipulates that you can only have big seeds if you're a big palm. Related to this, the axial conformity hypothesis stipulates that for same plant size, palms with less branched inflorescences can carry larger seeds. These are hypotheses linked to physical constraints, while the others are more ecological. For example, the shade hypothesis states that habitat shadiness will promote seed size increase because larger seeds will be more easily able to sustain the growth of the juvenile palm until it reaches the canopy light. The dispersal agent hypothesis stipulates that it is advantageous to have big seeds if big animals are around to disperse them, because big animals usually disperse seeds further. The island syndrome hypothesis specifies, in our context, that arrival on an island leads to increases or decreases in seed size in response to new selective pressures compared to where the lineage comes from. And finally, the sibling competition hypothesis proposes that the absence of seed dispersal agents will select for fewer seeds to avoid competition under the mother tree, and that producing fewer seeds will enable to produce larger seeds. In our study, we could only explore the influence of the factors that I put in red, while the hypothesis related to seed dispersing animals could only be discussed about because we do not have precise information on what animals disperse boraceae, nor on the past distribution ranges of these animals. Two of these hypotheses, the shade hypothesis and the sibling competition hypothesis, were proposed by Edwards and collaborators in 2002 to explain the existence of the double coconut, but they were never tested at the scale of boraceae. So here is what we found. When plotting seed size and maximal plant size of Lodoicea and its relatives, including or not ancestors, here I'm showing including ancestors, we can see the following. There is a relatively linear relationship between plant and seed size, but we can see exceptions. Notably that taller plants show two different patterns. Either the seeds keep increasing as the plant size increases, or it doesn't. When adding information about if the inflorescence is highly branched or not, we see that it explains those two patterns, since among the tallest palms here, only those that have few branched inflorescences, in black, show further increases in seed size. This interaction between plant size and inflorescence branching was found to have a statistically significant effect on seed size in our study. However, that was not the case anymore when we took the phylogenetic relationships of the species into account. You can see the role of inflorescence branching illustrated here with Lodoicea on the left, whose female inflorescences are unbranched and produce huge fruits, whereas its relative, Taina, on the right, is of a similar size as Lodoicea and has a huge but highly branched inflorescence that could not carry double coconuts. We also compared the seed sizes between species that occurred in closed or open habitats to see if we found support for the shade hypothesis. There was a tendency for species occurring in closed habitats to have larger seeds, but this was only true for Boraceae, and the small number of species in the group prevented us to assess the significance of this tendency. Finally, we compared the rates of seed size change here between insular species and species on continent. As predicted, there was a tendency for species arriving in islands to have higher rates of change in seed size, regardless if it was a decrease or an increase in size. We did different tests with different definitions of what is an island, but in any case, the small number of samples prevents us here again to draw conclusions about the island hypothesis. So, in summary, further studies involving more palm species representing independent transitions between seed sizes are necessary to draw a better picture of the factors that influence seed size evolution in palms in general and in Boraceae specifically. However, we don't have more species in Boraceae, so that this study might never be possible. Relationships between insularity, habitat, and seed size remain particularly unclear, and it's likely that, besides sampling, the lack of precise data on past habitats and past seed-dispersing animals will remain a limitation to disentangle the roles of habitat and insularity in palm seed size evolution. Nevertheless, we found some evidence in our data that support the allometry and the axial conformity hypothesis, in that taller palms with fewer branched inflorescences produced larger seeds. And we can use our new insights on the biogeography and seed size evolution of Boraceae to retrace now what may have happened to Lodoicea. First, the combination of large plant size and low branched inflorescences was likely decisive in allowing the evolution of large seeds in Boraceae. Second, around 80 million years ago, Boracea's ancestors started to spread all over South Asia and later across Africa and on some islands of the Indian Ocean. Early on, some species developed large seeds, and this was possibly facilitated by the increasing availability in those areas of large seed dispersing animals and/or shady habitats. Third, Lodoicea's ancestors, which had already 5 to 10 centimeter large seeds, dispersed to the Seychelles, most likely from East Asia, and possibly as early as 60 million years ago. The seeds of Lodoicea's ancestors were too big already to be dispersed by the fauna of the Seychelles when they arrived there. So, as predicted by Edwards, it may have been then more advantageous for them to produce fewer seeds to limit competition under the mother tree. Then, because trees invested in less seeds, they could produce bigger ones, therefore possibly leading to gigantism. So we bring some light to the mystery, but because Lodoicea is a single case, I'm afraid that the explanation of its origin might remain a mystery for a while still. But our study shows at least that for the double coconut to exist, many conditions had to be reunited in a given order, and the uniqueness of the double coconut suggests that this trait is unlikely to evolve many times. So it's really important that we conserve it. Now, many relatives of Lodoicea are also endangered by human activities, and they too are the result of a complex evolutionary history. And they have features that may not be easily replaced when they are extinct, so we should take good care of them while it's still possible. On this moralizing note, I would like to close this talk by acknowledging again the help of all the people who made this study possible, and notably Bill Baker, who has been involved in this long before I was, and Ilya Leach for her support. I also thank the organizers of this talk series for inviting me, and I'm thanking you for staying awake for 26 minutes now. And finally, I leave you with some references if you want to see beautiful pictures of the double coconut, read about its ethnobotanical history, or about its biology and conservation. A lot of what I mentioned in the introduction comes from these references. Thank you, and see you hopefully in 2021.